Hello there, everyone. So today I'm just here for my second NaNoWriMo vlog. I'm not sure if this will span the rest of it. We'll see. Depends how many interesting things happen. I'm doing a chaotic NaNoWriMo that I call NaNoTryMo, which is National Novel Trying to Write Month. My challenge for NaNoWriMo was just to write every single day. I had not written that much since July. I had a huge writing slump where I didn't really write anything for a couple months. When I think about the work that I've produced in the second half of 2021, it's barely anything. I want to be creating things, but I haven't been creating things because I'm mentally exhausted. My goal for NaNoWriMo was just to write every day. I don't have a single project that I'm working on. At the beginning of the month, I thought that I was gonna spend a lot of the month working on my new novel project, which is called Saltbirds, but I realized quickly that that was not the best idea. I was very excited to start this novel, but it's just not the time. I have a novel in the late editing stage, I have a novel in the early editing stage, and I have a short story collection that I'm trying to polish up. Starting a new novel, it's just not the time. What it has basically turned into is me just doing a bunch of miscellaneous short fiction tasks. I feel like I haven't really built up any kind of momentum. I don't feel that excited about it, but it's probably because I'm not drafting something new. Like, that's the fun part of writing for me, is drafting new stuff, not revising old short stories. But I know that by the end of the month, I'm going to feel very accomplished, because I will have gotten a lot of stuff off my to-do list. And one of my yearly goals was to finish revising all the stories in Pareidolia, which is my first short story collection, which technically I finished the first draft of like last year, and I've just put off editing because I don't like revising short stories. The biggest task that I had to do for that was to completely rewrite Symbiosis. You know, I think most people don't put their earliest short stories in their collection because by the time you're done the collection, you realize that you can just do so much better and that those were early stories you were learning and they're just not worth going in the collection. And the only reason why I have this really early story is because I feel like it is a crucial part of the book. I feel like in many ways I wrote the whole collection around this story. Like, I feel like this story is so integral to the general aesthetic of the book, but also the themes of the book. So I just feel like I have to have this story. I feel like it wouldn't be Pareidolia without this story. So I just totally need to rewrite it because it's just an absolute disaster in many, many ways. And I talked about this a little in the last vlog, so I won't get totally into it now, but it's just a mess. The prose was a mess. I rewrote the whole first draft, just keeping the structure the same, and so now I feel like I can actually look at the story and try to find the weak points in the structure. The main issue I have is the ending. I feel like I'm fine with the structure up until the ending. I think if I can crack the ending, then I'll feel good about it, but for now I just don't like the ending. And then what I'm currently working on, I have some edits to do for a literary magazine, and that's what I'm currently working on. I'm working with a magazine on my story How to Slaughter. They technically have not accepted it yet, but I am on my third round of revision with them. So they first, back in August, sent me a revise and resubmit, and I was like, okay, this will be straightforward. I'll do their edits. They'll either take it or leave it. So I did their edits. I felt like I'd pretty much done what they asked for, but there was one edit that I wasn't the most happy with how I'd done it, but I just couldn't think of a better way to do it on such short notice. Then they gave me a second round of edits where they were like, cool edits. We liked some of it. We don't like this part, which was also the part that I thought was pretty iffy. So then I did their second round of edits and I was like, okay, this has got to be it because I did basically exactly what they asked for. And then they were like, okay, nice edits, but also here's some more. And they gave me a line edited document. So I'm hoping that this time we'll have it and I will be done editing this story because this story is been torturing me for a long time. I wrote the story about this time last year and it's a very long story, and so it's just always been a pain to work with. So those edits are quite challenging. I did say that I would get them back by the end of the week, which was last week, which is come and gone because it's Monday. So that's what I'm currently working on, and then after that I'm gonna keep working on that Symbiosis rewrite probably, and hopefully I can figure out something to do with that. So today it's the 16th of November. So I'm gonna just walk over to a coffee shop that's really close to my house. I've actually never gone there to work before. My go-to working coffee shop that was so good, it closed down, which is so sad. So I'm just gonna walk over to this coffee shop, probably not for a super long time, and just write for like a couple of hours. The thing is, I've realized that I'm just not going to really have fun with writing until I'm done my How to Slaughter edits. These edits are really not fun to work on. They're honestly kind of a pain in the ass, but they're so difficult that I haven't been able to just sit down and get them done. Yesterday, I felt like I was finally starting to make decent progress, so I don't know if I'll be able to finish them today, but I'm hoping that if I actually dedicate a couple hours to it, I'll be able to get a good chunk of them done and hopefully be finished tomorrow. It's not like the most fun work. I'm honestly not even really looking forward to it. I just really need to get them done so I can actually work on other things. It's a little bit later the same day. My little excursion to go write, total failure. I got there was no seating available, so it's actually like a couple hours later. I've just been working on some stuff for my grad school applications, and I also started editing a video. Basically anything to procrastinate doing these stupid edits. I think the reason I just keep procrastinating these edits is just because they're not that enjoyable to work on, because I don't feel too confident in any of the changes that I'm making. So I'm gonna try to work on this for like, I don't know, an hour, a couple hours, just try to get a decent chunk out of it. And hopefully tomorrow maybe I will be able to do like the finishing touches. I feel very stalled in my progress for everything else while I have these edits to do. So it's about an hour later. I feel like I've made progress. I feel like instead of just staring at it, I did like actually shuffle some things around. Part of me kind of wants to see if I have the energy to try and work on something else, but I don't really know what. I guess I could look at that symbiosis revision, but that's also kind of frustrating me because I don't really know what angle I want to take with that. Like, I kind of need to think of a new way to end the story. I feel like the two things I'm working on right now, I don't really know how to proceed with them, right? What do I do? It's kind of frustrating that I don't really have anything that I can sit down and make like a satisfying amount of progress with. Okay, so what I think I'm gonna do, I've decided in the walk from the kitchen to my bedroom, because I don't feel like working more on this how to slaughter revision, because I just feel like I've hit a wall with it for the day. And I also don't know what I'm doing with that symbiosis rewrite. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to start combing over the other stories in Pareidolia. For a lot of them though, all they need is like a single editing pass to tweak the line. So I think I'm going to start looking at some of the stories that only need one editing pass. So I think I'm just going to start combing over some of the stories. So I just read over Kudzu Girls, which is one of the stories in Pareidolia. I'm going through in the order that I plan the stories to be in the book, and I do have Kudzu Girls as first. Kudzu Girls is probably the story that I have the most complicated relationship with, probably of any of my stories. It's an earlier story, or the first draft in late 2017, so it's been a while, and I started submitting it very confidently. I was very confident when I started submitting this story. I was like, oh, this is gonna get picked up soon because my prof was so enthusiastic about it and my classmates were so enthusiastic about it, and it's been rejected. I haven't counted in a while, but probably 30 times. I've been submitting that story since December of 2017. I actually worked with a professional editor on the story. I was able to get that for free through my job. He was great, actually, like really fantastic editor. Gave me really good notes, and he was like, yeah, like if you touch these things up, if you streamline these aspects, you'll be able to publish this story. Like, you know, that was a few years ago. And it hasn't been. Not even like a personalized rejection among the mix. In January, I submitted it to a couple more places, and I was basically like, after this, I'm done. Like, I think I'm pretty good at dealing with rejection, but it's just when it's the same story, because it starts to feel fruitless. Like at this point, when I would submit the story, I was like, I'm literally just submitting this for kicks. Like, they're not gonna take it, you know? I have no confidence that anyone will take that story. Reading it back is always something that I think I avoid at this point, because whenever I read it back, I'm like, what if I read it back and I'm like, yeah, this sucks, right? Like, what if I open it up, I'm like, oh, this is a pretty shit story. That's why they've been rejecting it for 4 years. I read it over. I think one reason is that I think the beginning is a little confusing. I think the beginning, it's hard to orient the characters in scene, and it's hard to picture where they are and what's going on. From page 2 to page 13, I think it's a really strong story, but I think the beginning is confusing. And that's probably one reason why it's getting rejected so much. It's gotten rejected so much, because if the beginning is confusing, like, the rest isn't getting read, right? I think that's the one issue I have with that story, but it is the story that I plan to have first in the collection, which is kind of a bit of a ballsy move, I think. Like, oh, this story's been rejected 30 times. I'm gonna put it first. I just feel like it's the best opener. Like, I can't think of another story that makes a better opener. I think I want to try and get through 2 more stories today. The next 2 on my list are Barefoot and Beautiful Animal. Both of these stories have been published before. Beautiful Animal, I don't think needs much. It came out last year in a magazine, and so I really don't think I'm gonna have that much that I want to fix, and it's a really short story, so I can read it pretty quickly. Barefoot, there's nothing structural I want to change in Barefoot, but I do think I'm gonna have a lot of little line edits. That's a story that I wrote the first draft of also in 2017, actually before Kudzu Girls even. It doesn't need an overhaul or anything, and I know I put a ton of care into that story, probably more than any story I've ever written. But I just wrote it at a time where I was really experimenting with my style. And I had a bunch of very weird habits at the time that I hadn't quite ironed out. The sentence structures would just be very strange. And I just had some really weird habits at the time that I think show in this story and that I would like to edit out. But that's really all. So that one's probably gonna take a little bit longer. Jumping in for today's little update. It is November 17th. This whole thing is making me so much more aware of the passage of time than I would normally like. Barefoot was an interesting experience. That one was very much a process of untangling some weird sentence structure. Like, all the imagery was there. Some of the imagery was phrased and structured in a really strange way that I'm like, why did I do that? It was nice to read it over. I think sometimes when stories are really old, most of the stories were written between 2017 and 2019. Because it's just been such a long time, I definitely doubt the quality of a lot of them because I haven't read them in so long. I know I've improved a lot and learned a lot since I first wrote them, so it's really easy in my mind to just be like, this draft is all a mess, all the stories are really bad. When I actually just haven't read them over in years, so I really don't even know what's up with them. So it was nice to reread Barefoot, a story that I put a lot of time into, see it more objectively. So it was kind of cool to see like, okay, yeah, this is a good story, and I can tell how much work I put into it, and I can see how many layers and see some of the little nuances that I'd kind of forgotten were in there. I cut a couple hundred words from the story. It was pretty long. It was like 5,800 words, and now it's like 53. Just because there was some stuff that I think, again, was in there because at the time I had emotional attachment to it, and now it's been years, and I'm like, this can just go. And then I also read over Beautiful Animal. That one I didn't anticipate would have much to change. I'd, done the revisions in 2020, and I feel like by the time I wrote that story and revised it, my style had evolved a lot. It didn't have a lot of the really strange, awkward stuff that some of the older stories have. I made a few small edits, but really that story took 10 minutes. Like, I just read it over once. There wasn't too much that I wanted to change. It's a very short piece anyway. It's literally like 8 pages long. Today, it is a work day. It's like 12:30 right now, so I'm not gonna be writing for a little while anyways. I'm gonna try and finish those revisions on How to Slaughter. They've been torturing me for about a week, but I do find with these edits, it's kind of like I start working on them, and after a certain while, I get so frustrated that I just hit a wall and I cannot make any more progress. And it usually doesn't take that long for that to happen. It would be nice. I felt really good yesterday about having gone over some of the other stories. I felt like I made good progress on this whole project of revising all of Pareidolia. I'm going to take a look at the beginning of Kudzu Girls, which I mentioned yesterday I felt needed another look, find a way to structure it in a way where it's clear, and then I think I'll be good with that story. Especially with it being the first story in the book, the beginning needs to be really strong. And then I also want to just try and do, my one pass over some other stories. I'm pretty much going through the book linearly. I'm just skipping over the 2 stories that need large revision, which is Darling, I Fear for You and Symbiosis, because I want to tackle those one at a time. So I think the next few stories coming up are Hold Me Under Till I See the Light, which should only take 1 editing pass. Melting Point, which I rewrote that story a few years ago, but I haven't really line edited it. So that one might be a little more detailed. And then that would leave me with Changing the Garden of Eden, which should only take 1 pass. Wishbone, which should only take 1 pass. I will never tell you this. I honestly don't know. I really don't know. I will never tell you this is a huge wild card. I get more comments on that story than any other story. Like, I still get messages about that story, like DMs and comments all the time from people telling me that they read that story, and the comments are always super lovely. I think it's because it's just the first one in my description and it's online, so I think people read that one first. You know what? You guys know what's in that story better than I do. Once my stories are published, I don't read them. because I'm worried that I'm gonna find stuff that I don't like. So I haven't read I Will Never Tell You This since it was published, which was in 2019. I did write that one, like that's a 2017 baby. So it might be messy. I want to think it's not going to be too bad, especially because the prose style that it's in is a little bit sparser than other stuff I wrote at the time, like Barefoot, but also 2017. So that one could be a mess, could be fine. My tentative plan, but it depends on a lot of things. The main wild card for me is these stupid How to Slaughter edits that are killing me slowly. I'm feeling a little stuck with those, so we shall see. So I just read over Hold Me Until I See the Light, and can I just say, that story slaps. Like I said, I don't read my stories after they're published, so I haven't read that story in like a year and a half. So I feel like I don't have too much faith in the stories, and it's not until I read over them that I can really see their like strengths and weaknesses. I feel like I'm kind of seeing the stories more objectively than I've ever seen them, because for most of them, it's literally been years since I wrote them. I was impressed with myself. I was like, okay, this is a good story. Didn't expect it to be that good, honestly. Like I'm even like thinking that I should just use it as my grad school application story. Now I have to look at Melting Point, which is probably going to be much more chaotic and not as good. Hello everyone, so I'm here today with today's update. So I ended up actually not doing the writing that I said I was going to do yesterday, where I said I was going to revise a few more stories because a friend of mine came over, and so I just spent the evening hanging out with them and my roommates. They left at like 11 and I was pretty tired, and I was like, okay, technically I would have time to edit a story, but also it's 11 and I would rather watch the new episode of Survivor. So I did that instead, and the two boots were very tragic. Two of my faves got voted out, and I'm going to be slowly getting over it today. And the main thing I want to get done today is to finish those edits on How to Slaughter. You know, I did tell the magazine that I would have them in by the end of the week, which was last week, and now it is Thursday of the following week. I am almost done those edits. Like, I would say they're pretty much done, and I finished them yesterday, but what I just need to do is review them all, make sure I'm totally happy with it, and then send them in. I'm just gonna continue working through the stories. I don't know how many I'll get through today. It really is hard to gauge how long each story will take. Some of them take a really long time, like Barefoot took quite a while. Hold Me Until I See the Light barely took any time. The way that I'm kind of feeling about NaNoWriMo in general, I think it's actually been really good for me, but its like effectiveness has kind of snuck up on me. You know, at the start of the month, I was finding myself extremely unmotivated and I didn't feel like writing. Like most days throughout the first week, maybe week and a half, I was like, I'm only writing today because I have to. Like I wouldn't write today if I wasn't doing this challenge. Over the past week or so, I've gotten into actually like really looking forward to it and feeling like I'm actually like looking forward to writing, and I'm setting goals and I want to reach them. It's really successfully gotten me back into producing work. Revising work. I've barely written new words. I think my total word count in terms of new words is like 8,000. I think if the goal was to get back into a regular writing practice, it's worked. It's really nice that I think I'm gonna have my collection completely revised. That's something that I've literally been putting off for a year and a half. Okay, it's like 1 in the morning, so I'm whispering because I don't want to wake anyone up. So I just read over I Will Never Tell You This, and I haven't read that story since it was published, which was in 2019. So I kind of forget what's in there. That shit's sad, man. But it's been so long since I read it that like I didn't really remember the details. And I feel like I kind of played myself. Because now it's 1 in the morning and I'm like crying. What is this? This is messed up. What? Why did I do that? What was wrong with me? So I'm sad now, which is great. So it is Saturday the 20th. So on Thursday, I probably had one of the most productive days of my nano so far, and honestly just like in a long time. I revised like most of Pareidolia. I revised Melting Point, Solarium, Cherry and Jane in the Garden of Eden, Wishbone, I Will Never Tell You This, and Peon in Space. So 7 stories. Most of them I kind of was able to just like put to rest. Like I did my one draft that I needed to do and it's done. So kind of just going through them. First I did Melting Point. That one pretty messy, I would say. It really shows that this is the first story I ever wrote, and even though I completely rewrote it a couple years ago, and it just doesn't have like the nuance or the layers that my later stories have. So that one I think needs a bit more work. I think the character motivations around the actual situation of the story are really unclear, and in general I found a lot of the writing to be just like a little too melodramatic. It's not like it's not a dark collection, because there is some death. There's some messed up stuff that happens in this book, but I think Melting Point really stuck out as almost being like too grungy. Every aspect of the character's life was just so messed up in every possible way that it kind of stuck out as being a little too much. Writing the story on its own that was accurate to the character, but reading it in contrast with the other stories in the book, it really stuck out as being a little too much. I feel like most of the stories in the collection either have more of like a magical kind of tone or more of like a melancholic kind of tone, and this one was just like really dark. I think it was just a little too gritty, just a little too much, so I toned that down. So then I read Solarium, which I think also made me realize, reading Melting Point and Solarium like back to back, Solarium is a story that's actually like about addiction. That story felt so much more nuanced, dealing with similar overlapping subject matter to Melting Point. So I was actually really happy with that story. It's never been one of my favorites. I actually really kind of appreciated it, I feel like, for the first time, having just read it over. So I made some minor edits to that one. Next I read Cherry Jane and Garden of Eden, which was the most confident I felt about any story. Like, most of the book I honestly didn't think was that strong because the stories are so old, so I've been pleasantly surprised by some of them. But Cherry and Jane, I was like, this is a strong story, and I knew it was a strong story. It was one of the last stories I wrote for the book. Actually, I probably made like a handful of tiny line edits. Then I read Wishbone, which this one I was also like very pleasantly surprised by. I put a lot of work into that story across many drafts, but haven't looked at it in a while. I again made small edits. Then I read I Will Never Tell You This. This is the one that I think I was the most surprised by, because this is actually one of the oldest stories in the book. It's the fourth story that I ever wrote and the third oldest story in the book. Like, I wrote this right when I was just getting into short stories. Like, I feel kind of weird saying this because it sounds very arrogant, but I was like shocked by how good it was. Like, I haven't read the story in so long, so like I really didn't remember. Like, I remembered the general scenes and everything, but I didn't really remember any of the nuances or any of the actual lines. I was so surprised by how good the dialogue was. I was like, wait a second, this dialogue's actually good, because I'm normally not very confident with dialogue. I was really surprised, I think, especially because I just read Melting Point and I'd been working on Symbiosis, which I wrote around the same time, and both of those stories I've just been like, these just aren't nuanced stories. So I kind of expected I Will Never Tell You This to be the same, but I was like, wait, this is like a nuanced story with like complex characters. In that one I really just made a few edits to voice, like I've been talking about. I used to, at the time I wrote the story, use a lot of weirdly structured language, so I did fix that. And then there were just a few points where I felt like there were ideas that could be fleshed out a little more, so I just added like a tiny bit of elaboration, and also a few things I cut because I felt like they were a little too on the nose. And then the last one, at this point it was like 1 a.m, but I was just on a roll, was Peon in Space, and that's a very short story. It's only 1,700 words, and it's pretty much just narrative reflection. Like, it's literally just the character thinking. There are just 3 stories left that I'm still working on. Melting Point, which I, again, as I talked about, I just feel like is lacking nuance and clarity, and so I just have issues with that one, but I'm not really sure how to fix it. And then same thing with Symbiosis, which is, I've been working on rewriting it, and I'm like, what am I even doing with this? It's a hot mess. And then the last one that I need to work on is Darling, I Fear for You, which is the only one that I haven't even started working on. Part of me feels like I should just cut those 3 stories and replace them with stories, newer stories that I am putting in my second collection. I really like how my second collection is fitting together in terms of like how all the stories contribute to the core theme of that book. And I just feel like there are some thematic differences. I don't know, so I just feel like these 3 stories are meant to go in this book. They're just not as good. So I also finished Kudzu Girls. That's the other thing I did on Thursday, was fix the beginning of Kudzu Girls. All I have left is those 3 stories, but they're like the problem stories that aren't working. The other thing that I've been working on is my How to Slaughter edits. I know I said that on Thursday I was gonna put those to rest and submit them. I ended up not doing that because I was working on them and I was pretty much done and about to send them in, and then I kind of had a revelation about one aspect of the story and how it should be expressed. So I have to go do that today. Yesterday I was busy like all day. I just like added like literally 2 sentences to symbiosis. That is what has happened. It was a very eventful day on Thursday. I basically, like, it was a work day, so I didn't start writing until pretty late, and then I proceeded to spend the whole evening editing like almost the entire book, like reading the entire book, which was interesting. I feel a lot better about the manuscript now that I've read all of the stories. Reading the whole book all together, all at once, really did highlight what the good stories are and what the bad ones are. Like reading Melting Point sandwiched between Hold Me Until I Say the Light and Solarium just really highlighted how weak a story Melting Point is. So I've done all the easy work, and now I just kind of have my work cut out for me because I have to take the 3 stories that are actually weak and like make them good. And I don't really know how. So I'm just gonna finish off this video because it's getting pretty long. So on Saturday, I finished the How to Slaughter edits. I was editing this vlog back. In every single clip, I'm like, so today I'm gonna try and finish those edits, if not today, tomorrow. And that went on for the whole week. So I did finally finish those edits on Saturday. For now, it's not something that I really have to think about. So basically where I'm at is I'm almost done editing my collection. You know, for something that I decided to do, I mean, it wasn't on a whim, but it kind of was on a whim. It's been my goal to edit my whole collection for like over a year. It was one of my yearly goals for this year. About a month or so ago, I realized that I wasn't going to like attain any of my yearly goals. I will have partially attained 2 of them, but I won't have fully attained any of them. And so I was like, you know what, let's just do this, let's go. Let's edit this collection. So I've finished 9 out of the 12 stories, so all I have left is Melting Point, Symbiosis, and Darling I Fear for You, the 2 oldest stories and the most recent story. I really want to be done editing those stories. I think the thing that's a little tricky is that I don't really have like a solid game plan for how to proceed with any of them. I know that they're bad, but I don't really know exactly how to fix them. So I've started with Melting Point because I feel like that one I did notice some structural issues when I was reading it over, some things that like really don't make sense. That story begins in medias res, with the main character talking to her brother in the car. And then we flash back to a few hours before when he shows up. We get a bit of context for their relationship, and she goes out to meet them, and we get, this is where it doesn't make sense. They have a conversation in the car in part 1 that feels like you're getting like the second half of a conversation. And then in the second scene, we catch up to, we get the beginning, but we actually get like the whole conversation that like ends and they leave. Where did the conversation from the car from the first scene fit into this? Because we had them having a conversation in the car, and then a few hours before, and then them having the conversation in the car again. But that's like a whole conversation where she arrives, they talk, and then they leave. Where was all the stuff they were saying in the first scene? Where did that happen? When did that happen? Was that like a bubble reality? I think that the reason I had started it in medias res is just that's how the first draft of the story ever was. There's no reason for it to be like that. It just makes it more confusing to read. So why don't I just put it linearly? Also, the ordering of the flashbacks was very strange. So I'm switching the order of the flashbacks so that the most important flashback, the one that actually fuels the whole story and all of the character motives, happens nearer to the beginning. I think this story is very like, there's a fictive present scene and then a scene in the past, a fictive present scene and a scene in the past, and it alternates. But there was one bit near the end where we just had 2 scenes in the fictive present. And so I'm gonna add one more scene that I hope will add some more nuance to like the characters and stuff. So that's kind of what I'm working on. I don't know really how long it will take. Like, my goal is to be done these 3 stories before the end of NaNoWriMo. I don't really know how realistic that is, you know. It kind of just depends on if I'm able to solve the problems that the stories have or not. I'll pop up a little diagram of my collection and the current state of my collection. Green means the story is done. Yellow means it's in progress, like I'm currently working on it. And then I do think that once I'm done all the stories, I am gonna read the collection over one more time. I'm gonna try to do it either in one day or spread over 2 days. I think I can probably do it in one day, considering that I read 9 out of 12 stories in just one evening, starting at like 8 p.m. And I just want to read it over one more time to make any tiny final edits, but also to look at the whole structure of the book and see if there are any places where maybe the stories don't flow together very well, and maybe I want to change the order. Because I think at this point I maybe do want to make some tweaks to the order, but I feel like I need to read the whole thing all together. That is all for this video. There will be a part 3 to this. Please, in the comments, just let me know how your NaNoWriMo is going, what your goals were, what you've been working on, what the ups and downs have been. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!